Taiwan and is published in multiple journals, such as the Journal of Chinese Political Science, the European Journal of East Asian Studies, and Politics and Policy. Her recent publication is China Beyond China, Establishing a Digital Order of Chinese Characteristics, China's Growing Discursive Power and the Digital Silk Road. As a reminder, we do our Q&A session after the completion of the presentations, and our respective participants can write their questions in the chat box or by raising their virtual hand and posing their questions in person. You can find this button at the bottom of the screen. Now, I leave you with Dr. Rune Steenberg, who will present an overall view on populism in the covered countries and administer the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christo, and thank you to the ECPS for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm very happy to be here with so many esteemed scholars, and I really look forward to the discussion we're going to have and to the talks we're going to hear. I'm also very happy that this topic is being pursued by the ECPS. I think it's a very important, very timely topic, and especially the perspective of looking at it from a global lens, but also not with the focus on Europe or the United States, I think is something that is very, very welcome and important as a perspective. So to start out, I want to make a small disclaimer in the sense that I am not a scholar of authoritarianism. I'm not a scholar of populism. I'm an anthropologist who's been working on Central Asia, China, and most particularly the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, also known as East Turkestan, since 2009. I've been working on kinship, on trade, economic anthropology, and of course, I've also seen the rise of both populism and authoritarianism in China and across the globe. So it's from this perspective that I pursue my introduction, and it's also from this perspective that I will offer my comments at the end, not necessarily as a specialist in this narrow field, but looking at it in a broader anthropological perspective and from a broader angle. So populist authoritarianism in China has been on the rise, at least for 10 years, even though it's been written about as a mode for much longer than that and been predicted by scholars before that. It has often been connected to Xi Jinping's rise to power and his wolf warrior diplomacy, certain forms of propaganda either returning or appearing in China, and pride in China and Chineseness, more assertive policies, and of course also the competition with the United States, trade wars, mutual accusations of human rights abuse, at the same time also with inner repressions, rise in surveillance, limitations of civil rights, freedoms of expression, and a popular support that's often difficult to understand from a European or an American perspective, a popular support of imperial ambitions, as we could call it, in relation to Hong Kong, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, and also particularly Xinjiang, where I have been working for the last decade. There is one strain of analysis that approaches this change in policy, if we could call it so, from a Chinese history perspective. Deng Xiaoping's reform economy or economic reforms that started in the late 70s had the idea of hiding one's strength till one is strong enough to assert oneself on the global scene. And there is an argument to be made for this time having come. This is certainly what Xi Jinping and other leaders have been saying. Also, there is a reference in that connection to the century of humiliation of China having been colonized, having come out of the shadow of colonization and of post-colonization, and now returning, as André Gunder-Frank was writing already in the 70s and 80s, to the central scene of the world. In connection with this is also Chinese policies to go abroad. The BRI Belt and Road Initiative that we're going to hear more about today also, but also the connection and cooperation with African, South and Latin American countries, and framing China as an anti-colonial and a decolonial power, while at the same time, of course, gathering support and also popular support for its own colonial policies within the country, especially the areas that it had colonized during Qing and has been holding on to. And there are questions in relation to how much of this is state-led, how much of this comes from the bottom, what is the grassroots element in all of this, what is the state-led element in it. There are certain reminders in today's policies of the Cultural Revolution. And the Cultural Revolution, too, was a popular, though state, in a sense, state-initiated, but also with a strong grassroots element in Xinjiang's re-education camps and the campaigns that the Chinese state has been pursuing in Xinjiang. We have seen very strong reminders of the Cultural Revolution and also the breaking up of traditional society, traditional ties, to the advantage of a modernization policy pursued by the Chinese government. Scapegoats, both internal and external enemies being brought up, is a big part of populism everywhere. And we've seen this also in the Chinese context. But of course, this is a very different situation than the Cultural Revolution. It comes as China has become a global economic power, and it closes in on the US as the largest economy, depending on which measures you measure it or which criteria you measure it around, and also is in the process of building a military that is in competition with other big powers in the world. It also comes at a time of a shift in global economy and in China's role in the global economy, moving from workshop of the world and purely export-oriented, the cheap labor of the world for neoliberal globalization, to a economy that is more focused on its own markets, that is more focused on high-end value and so on and so forth. Made in China 2025 was the initial policy attempt to push in this direction, or the most popular one. But since AI, 5G, aerospace, semiconductors, and electrical vehicles like Build Your Dream, which is now one of the big global brands, also surveillance technology like Hikvision, which is being used all over the world, including currently in Israel and Palestine, space missions and so on, has put China in a very different and much more globally oriented position than it was during the Cultural Revolution. This is in part a development, of course, that can be connected to Deng Xiaoping's initial ideas, but it's also a development that has become necessary as the global economy has changed. And I think that the crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, has been very central in putting China on this path, or at least in triggering it. This I would love to hear the speaker's thoughts of as well. And that, of course, is a global development and thus connects to similar developments in other countries. So the Chinese turn to populist authoritarianism comes in a context of many other countries and many other regions, similar turn to populist authoritarianism. Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson, Trump, Viktor Orban, Erdogan, Japarov in Kyrgyzstan, Duterte in the Philippines, even, and of course, people who didn't get to power like Marine Le Pen, but have still been pushing in that direction, are all to be mentioned I think, in this context. And even so-called benevolent people like Jokowi in Indonesia and maybe even Lula in Brazil, though not necessarily pushing the authoritarian part of it, are definitely pushing the populist part of it. This comes along with hardening borders, refugee crisis in Europe, environmental crisis, exploding global inequalities, and the breakdown, which I think peaked in the global financial crisis, of the neoliberal world order. So with Yanis Varoufakis talking about cloud feudalism, even the classical scholar of neoliberalism, David Harvey, saying neoliberalism is coming to an end or might be over. Rampant surveillance, breakout of conflicts all over the world, civil liberties and freedoms of speech generally under attack. And we're seeing this right now at US universities, cracking down on student protests against the killings in Gaza, the same in Germany, where I'm sitting, a lot of civil liberties and liberties of freedom of speech being limited. So we're seeing a global moment. And China takes part in that. How much comes from the inside? How much comes from the outside? How much comes from the state? How much is grassroots, but of course related to this breakdown of a certain global order that we've had? What is the role of the global financial crisis? What is the role of US declining power and Chinese power competition in relation to China? And what is generally the role of this global move that also includes figures like Steve Bannon and other people that Naomi Klein in her recent book Doppelganger have named the mirror world, a world that is rising on the basis of populism and that is in support of authoritarianism and these scapegoatings. We will see the Chinese perspective of this, and we will look at it in a global context. And I really look forward to the talks. So this is my introduction so far, and I will now hand over to our first speaker. Dr. Kun He is a postdoctoral researcher at the computational linguistic group within the University of Groningen. And he is today going to be speaking to us about who are the people, populist articulation of the people in contemporary China. Please, Dr. Kun He, go ahead.
Well, thank you for your introduction. Now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, now can you see my screen? Okay, let's see.
Yes, we see it.
Okay. Yeah. So recently, thank you so much for your introduction. My name is Kun He. I'm a postdoc researcher focused on populism and also human-AI interaction under the frame of computational social science. Let's see. Okay. So today I'm going to first introduce the global rise of populism. Then I will talk about populism as a contested concept. The third part is about the tensions around the concept of the people. And the last part is populist articulation of the people in China. So now, well, recently we have observed the global rise of populism, the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands, led by Geert Wilders, who surprisingly won 37 seats and led the largest party in the Dutch parliament. This outcome, unexpected as it was, is not unique in the global context. Consider the electoral success of Javier Milei in Argentina, and also the resurgence of Donald Trump in 2024. While these are not isolated, but events rather part of a larger, complex global phenomenon. So, but what is populism and what makes these populist figures so attractive? Well, populism actually is a contested concept, primarily rooted in its conceptual diversity. Scholars have grappled with various dimensions of populism, including its appeals to the pure people versus the corrupt elite, its critique of established power structures, its rhetoric style, and its left-wing or right-wing orientations. So the absence of a consensus on these core elements has led to the development of multiple approaches or framework for understanding populism, including but not limited to populism as an ideology, as a strategy, as a discourse, political style, or social movements. The second aspect underpinning the contested nature of populism lies in its chameleonic attributes, showing its ability to adapt and change its color or characters in different settings. This chameleon-like ability of populism allow it to manifest across a broad spectrum of political, social, and economic landscape, and resonate with the different local context to respond to different grievances. So in democratic context, this adaptability can be observed when populist parties or populist leaders serve as mediators, appearing in the name of the people against the elite and established power, who are seen as no longer representing the general will of the people. While this top-down understanding of populism is perhaps most prevalent, and populism is also observed in the bottom-up global grassroots movements, rather than being orchestrated by a hierarchical structure or charismatic leaders. Grassroots movements such as the global Occupy movements embrace a collective and bottom-up populism. So the slogan, "We are 99%, strongly anchors the populist, the people versus the elite appear. So to account for the conceptual diversity and ambiguity, so my research or many works on the minimal definition, proposing populism as an appeal to the people against the corrupt elite or the established ruling power. A further sign of its adaptability, populism changed its color when observed in China, where it's defined by online and bottom-up features. In China, populist dynamics are apparently when grassroots individuals shielded by the semi-anonymous feature of the internet and digital platforms. So they act as a united and collective entity of netizens. Together, they directly express their grievance and critiques against the perceived corrupt elite or established power. This form of populism is distinguished by its, sorry, wait for a moment. Sorry, could you please? Well, this form of populism is distinguished by its bottom-up approach, where the mobilization and articulation of dissent emerge originally from the populace. Furthermore, the semi-anonymous feature of the internet, to some extent, enable netizens to voice their discontent and opposition without fear of direct censorship. So moreover, unlike the top-down populist mobilization in democratic context, netizens' networked collective action in China is decentralized. So it relies on the spontaneous and collaborative of individuals united by common grievance and aspirations. And this decentralization allows individuals to disseminate contested information. So now let's move to the second, let's see, the third section, the tensions around the people. So before that, we can watch a video. It's about is part of Donald Trump's inaugural speech. Let's take a look.
Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country.
Well, in his speech, the people have borne the cost. The people did not share the wealth, and the people lost their jobs. However, the Washington, D.C., as a small group in the country, flourished and has been protected. So we can see that Trump's inaugural speech strongly echoes the theme that were centered to his campaign: a populist, anti-establishment, and an anti-elite message combined the promise to transfer the power back to the people. Trump tapped into a feeling that among many voters that the political system was broken and the Washington establishment was not serving the people. Thus, the key to define populism is the people. But now, what are the tensions around the people? Well, conceptual tensions around the people primarily manifested along two axes: the vertical axis of power and the horizontal axis of boundaries. The discursive power of the people stems from the contradiction between those who are said to be in power in society and those who really are. According to the modern democratic theories, legitimacy and political power rest on the sovereign people, who are at least the titular holders of social power. This understanding also underpins populist argument that politics should be an expression of the general will of the people. Thus, by claiming to represent the general will of the people, populists associate themselves with this moral priority and feel empowered by the majority support. So in practice, well, whether seen as individuals or as a collective body, people are not the actual wielers of the power. The actual holders of power are those corrupt elite who are defined on the basis of power, including those who holding leading positions within politics, economy, and the media and the art. The demonstration surrounding the people have allowed it to be conceptualized as both inclusive and exclusive. When the people is framed as a relatively inclusive concept, it is unifying, capturing as many people as possible. However, the inclusive concept of the people also contribute to the cognitive ambiguity and practical tensions. On the one hand, the larger the scale, the more we need to treat the people as a united abstract construction. On the other hand, abiding by the mechanism of representative democracy, individuals are compelled to submit the sovereignty rights to the collective body and will. Because populism operates in national context, being part of a nation and sharing its characteristics are the primary criteria for belonging to the people. The national characteristics of the people exclude others from it. This exclusive concept of the people derived from a political subjective identity and distinction personally characterized, rooted in the idea of the nation. In addition, the exclusive understanding of the people also refers to the common people in general, including the poor, underprivileged, and the excluded. So in the context of China, like online and bottom-up populist articulation often revolves around three meanings. The first meaning of the people is the people as Chinese nation. When an exclusive concept, it excludes foreign others and those elite who are seen as betraying the Chinese identity. So drawing on a historic sense of solidarity, the people as Chinese nation function as an ideological glue to mobilize followers and protest against external others. So the second meaning that of the people is the people as the mass. So this concept is characterized not only by an anti-intellectualism associated with an effective aversion to the scientist and expert, but also through support for a satirical subculture advocated by the masses that challenges the hegemony of elite-dominated cultural production and cultural institutions. The people as the mass reveal the tension and dynamic between the masses and expert, and the mainstream culture and elite culture. So particularly highlighting the wisdom, identity, and value of the ordinary people in cultural production, while challenging the cultural and intellectual authority of the elite. Well, the third meaning of the people is the people as socially vulnerable groups. So socially vulnerable groups as the third category refers to those who occupy a subaltern position in terms of economic status and financial stability, who are powerless in policy making or policy formation. The concept of a socially vulnerable group is a dynamic grouping because vulnerability arising out of the political marginalization can change over time. The affordance of networked platform provide relatively autonomous and anonymous space for members to express the grievance and discontent to those in power. And on the other hand, this online opening previous unavailable channels for right preserving. And these online right preserving activities can sway public opinion and trigger emotional outburst. And in doing so, they can increase ideological segregation and between socially vulnerable groups and the elite group. So my conclusion that by disentangling the meanings attached to the people, the categories that emerge reflect the changing ways in which the elite people or the serve others relationships are imaged in Chinese populist discourse. And the affordance availed by the network platforms provide a place for people to vent their voice. And third, in the Chinese context, the relationship between the people and the elite are in a dynamic correlation. The elite are included and excluded in the concept of the people in different historic periods. So that's all of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Yep.
Thank you so much, Kunhe, for a very informative and great presentation. We will have our Q&A session at the end of all the presentations. So everyone who has a question, please hold on to it. You can write it into the chat, or you can keep it in mind for the end. So now we will move on to our second speaker, Dr. Martin Lavichka from Lund University. Visiting research fellow for this at the Center of East and Southeast Asian Studies at Lund University, and a former colleague of mine from Palatsky University, Olomouc. Martin is going to present on religion with Chinese characteristics, regulating religions under Xi Jinping. Please go ahead, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Yeah, looks good. Okay, so thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers from the European Center for Populism Studies for putting together this online panel and for having me. China is certainly not the country with the best human rights protection record, including the freedom of religion. Despite that, the number of religious believers in China has been steadily rising, which on the one hand poses serious challenges. On the other hand, it also offers opportunities for the Chinese leadership. Therefore, the title of my presentation is Religion with Chinese Characteristics, Regulating Religions under Xi Jinping. And I plan to talk about the current developments in Chinese government policies aimed at religious practitioners in China. So I think it's always a good start to remind us that the Constitution of the People's Republic of China explicitly prohibits discrimination and oppression against any nationality and guarantees all its citizens the freedom of religious belief. Moreover, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, China should also play an exemplary role in promoting the UN Bill of Rights. Of course, this also applies to the other UN members, but today we focus on China. Despite the constitutional protections and international obligations resulting from numerous human rights covenants China signed or ratified, which you can see in the table, a significant number of observers, including United Nations bodies and international NGOs, have consistently highlighted the more troubling reality of religious freedoms in China. In recent years, we've seen disturbing reports, especially about the Uyghurs, a predominantly Muslim group living in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, also known as East Turkestan, outside China proper. Reports about the incarceration camps, enforced labor, and women's sterilization made it to the headlines of the most renowned newspaper outlets and TV channels. Moreover, in 2022, the UN Human Rights Office concluded in the report on human rights in the Uyghur region that the Chinese state might be responsible for committing crimes against humanity. It seems, however, that the so-called blaming and shaming strategy to force a country to change its problematic policy no longer works, especially when dealing with a major power such as China. So while the recent media reports have been predominantly focusing on the situation of Muslim Uyghurs, it does not mean that the other permitted religions in China are avoiding repression by the Chinese state and are not closely controlled. The party state's restrictive approach to religious affairs has intensified under the leadership of Xi Jinping. However, China's leaders have not changed their general attitude towards religion since the early 1980s. Of course, from today's perspective, the 1980s looks like a golden age of religious revival in China, especially compared to the denigration of religious practice during the Cultural Revolution. Nevertheless, the 1982 party directive known as Document 19, which you can see in this slide, clearly states that the religion is a relic of history and instrument of oppression by feudalists, reactionaries, and capitalists, and that eradicating religion in China would be a lengthy endeavor. So it appears that Xi Jinping's administration hopes to accelerate this process. At the 2016 National Conference on Work related to religious affairs, Xi Jinping specifically mentioned the need to strengthen the level of rule of law in religious work. He chaired the 2016 conference himself, signifying the prominence of religious issues for his leadership and most probably his dissatisfaction with the current situation. So in his speech, he stated that CCP members must act as unyielding Marxist atheists, consolidate their faith, and bear in mind the party's tenets. So this unsurprising stance also clearly illustrates that the party is above the law in China because the CCP members are required to be atheists. However, according to the Article 36 of the PRC Constitution I showed at the beginning, all citizens shall enjoy freedom of religious belief. In the 1980s, 1990s, the enforcement of this rule was more flexible, particularly among cadres in areas with predominantly minority populations. However, that leniency is no longer an option. So the Communist Party views religion with suspicion and believes that foreign forces can use it to undermine the government. It's not surprising that the former State or National Administration for Religious Affairs, in short SARA, its director, the former director Wang Zuan, stated that Western countries use religious human rights to distort China's religious situation and infiltrate China with different ideologies, attempting to change China's political system. And therefore, according to him, the party must guide religions to adapt to a socialist society and localize, in other words, sinicize it. Plus, religions must fully recognize the leadership of the CCP and adhere to the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics. I will mention the State Administration for Religious Affairs again later, but this institution was basically incorporated into the United Front Work Department in 2018. And this organizational change signified the importance of the agenda for the Communist Party, and that the party wanted direct control over the religious affairs in China. So the Communist Party's long-term goal is to gradually reduce the role of religion in Chinese society. Meanwhile, the party tries to utilize religion for its own goals. So the Chinese strategy is not only about controlling or repressing, but also about utilizing what basically you cannot destroy. But how can China do that? For example, it ensures that religious personnel favor political leadership, pledge their loyalty to the party, and use the correct patriotic teaching to influence religious practitioners. In recent years, we've witnessed an increasing number of religious restrictions targeting not only Uyghur Muslims, but also increasingly encompassing a wider range of religious practitioners across China. So therefore, in today's presentation, I plan to address at least some of these recent policies and laws and examine the so-called Chinification of religions and show the shrinking space for religious believers in today's China. So in the 2016 National Religious Work Conference I mentioned already, Xi Jinping highlighted the need for China's religions to adhere to the path of Sinicization and embody the nation's unity, patriotism, and excellent traditional culture. The party has since incorporated these ideas into its own doctrine. So within the last 4 to 5 years, basically, the State Administration for Religious Affairs has issued 7 distinct management measures addressing various aspects of religious affairs nationally. These include measures related to religious groups, Hajj pilgrimage for the Muslims, religious clergy, religious education institutions, online religious information services, and venues for religious activity. So the table shows the proportion of topics addressed in actually all of the 19 management measures available at the SARA website published by the State Administration for Religious Affairs, with a significant portion dealing with religious activity venues and religious education institutions. As I mentioned earlier, ensuring that religious teaching does not undermine the party state leadership is crucial. Therefore, it's necessary to ensure that the religious personnel is properly selected and trained to convey the correct ideas to the religious followers. Thus, the party is clearly concerned about the institutions providing religious education to future religious personnel. The 2021 management measures for religious education institutions state that providing religious education must reflect Chinese characteristics. The educational institutes are tasked with nurturing patriotic religious talents who can reliably interpret religious doctrines. Moreover, religious schools should provide necessary conditions for CCP staff members to establish grassroots party organizations and carry out activities. In the same document, we can also read that courses offered at these institutions must be divided into general and professional. The proportion of general classes shall not be less than 30%. And in terms of content, these courses should include lectures on ideological and political theory, as well as Chinese culture and society, with the goal of in-depth study of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era and socialist core values. The Chinese government is not only concerned about the content of religious teachings or religious personal loyalty. Over the last few years, it has also started to focus on the so-called foreign influences that materialize, for example, in dresses or head coverings of Muslim women, or in the architectural features of religious venues. You've probably seen numerous reports about the removal of distinctive architectural features of mosques, such as domes, minarets, and even crescent symbols, which the party state views as a reflecting foreign or even radical influence over domestic religious adherents. So this slide shows the example of the Weizhou Grand Mosque in Ningxia or the Sunyi Mosque in Beijing, basically before and after the Sinicization of those buildings. Less than a week ago, I published a short article for China File about the recent amendment of the Xinjiang Regulation on Religious Affairs. And according to the newly added article, religious activity sites that are newly built, renovated, expanded, or rebuilt should reflect Chinese characteristics and style regarding architecture, sculptures, painting, decoration, etc. So similar wording was already present in the 2023 administrative measures for the management of religious activity venues, but with these amended regulations, these objectives made their way into the actual state law. So what is the future of religion with Chinese characteristics? Now we are observing how China implements new measures to de-religionize the religions and recreate their organizational structure to reflect the party-state administration of defined tasks, responsibilities, and punishments. Moreover, it infuses them with non-religious elements such as the above-mentioned education on Xi Jinping thought and socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era, socialist core values, and so on. However, the main goal of these changes is to protect the dominance of the CCP's ideology and prevent any challenges to its control, both internally and from external influences. To illustrate the reality, imagine that you decide to study Buddhism, but you end up having more than 1/3 of your curriculum dealing with socialist core values and Xi Jinping thought. Moreover, all of the study materials, activities, and even your teachers will be carefully selected and closely monitored by the agency of the Communist Party of China. To demonstrate further bizarre, like how bizarre some regulations can be, here's another example from the 2008 State Agency for Religious Affairs Management Measures dealing with the so-called reincarnated living Buddha. It basically states that, among other things, that the temple management organization or the local Buddhist association where the reincarnated living Buddha is registered shall submit a reincarnation application to the Religious Affairs Department. So the idea of a reincarnated Buddha having to go through the application procedure and wait for the approval of the State Agency of Religious Affairs is nothing but tragicomic. So we see in China today that the party state seeks to utilize religions for its own purposes, aiming to influence a substantial segment of China's population that might otherwise acknowledge the presence of an authority that's higher than the Communist Party of China. Just think about the numbers. According to the official Chinese sources, there are about 200 million religious believers in the country, probably much more, while CCP membership is approximately 92 million. So here I will end my presentation with a picture of what artificial intelligence thinks about religion in China. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's fascinating, and I hope you will be able to, in the Q&A session, tell us a little bit about your last picture there and how it was generated. So I'm curious about that. But also, thank you very much for very informative talk. There are many things to be approached and taken up from that. Again, we will do that at the end of the session in the Q&A. So please hold on to your questions, write them into the chat or use the Q&A function. In the meantime, we will move on to our third speaker, Dr. Ibrahim Öztürk, Professor of Economy and Visiting Fellow at the University of Duisburg-Essen. Dr. Öztürk is going to be presenting a talk entitled Unveiling China's Global Populism, Sharp Power Politics Along the Belt and Road Initiative. Please, Dr. Öztürk, take it away.
Thank you very much. I apologize for my voice because of sharp temperature fluctuations in Germany. I am a little bit sick, but I'll try my best. So today I'm going to handle with a really challenging issue of linking Chinese way of populism with Belt and Road Initiative and also with sharp power politics. So my presentation consists of three sections. First, I spent some part of my time on some theoretical issues, how to legitimize talking about populism in such an authoritarian regime. In the second session, I'm going to talk about Belt and Road Initiative within the given context of populism, transnational populism indeed, and finally discuss sharp power politics, use of sharp power politics along the Belt and Road Initiative. So from my viewpoint, if we are talking about populism, then we are talking about improving the representation of people, improving their democratic status and improving their well-being. So if there is no way of changing political power through fair or non-fair election system, we cannot talk about populism. In that regard, at least we should have electoral or competitive populism. But in China, as far as I know, we cannot talk about changing power from Communist Party into anything else. Therefore, it is in conventional sense, it is not easy to talk about a Chinese populism. But this is not part of my discussion today. I will try to do something because I'm going to discuss Belt and Road Initiative, which is a transnational project. In order to handle with that issue, we have to change the dimension and border of populism from nation state into a global arena. So therefore, we have to define a transnational populism rather than dealing populism at a nation state as a unit of analysis. So when we replace citizen and establishment elite with transnational populism, then it means that it might bring us different results in terms of understanding currently rising multipolar world. In a transnational populist approach, rather than citizen at the nation state, we replace it with transnational people. And also we replace elite at nation level with transnational elite, which are conceived as small and illegitimate powerful groups. So when we want to replace national populism with a transnational populism, 5 conditions must be considered. The first issue is to replace of nation scale as a unit of analysis for populism with global scale. The second condition is the invention of a transnational people rather than people within the state, within the borders of a nation state. By the way, when I talk about citizens, it does not represent an element of nation state. I am using the term citizen, those who are deprived of power, who are deprived of good representation in a political entity. So in order to create a cross-border populism, transnational populism, we have to distinguish populism from nationalism in conventional sense. Otherwise, we cannot talk about a transnational populism. And by theoretical speaking, citizen does not represent the element of a political unity, such as nation state. The third important element is the definition of an establishment or elite on a worldwide scale, which I'm going to try for China. And fourth element is a political agent who defends the interest of the global citizens against the establishment and establishment elites. And finally, the rhetoric developed by this agent advocates systematic change for the masses of global citizens. What that agent is offering us, what kind of representation mechanism is offered for the citizens of the world, in other words. Indeed, one such a transnational effort to understand populism has been exposed by Democracy in Europe 25, which is abbreviated as DM25, launched by former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis, which seeks to construct a transnational left political project to democratize Europe. Its construction of European people against an international elite, however, raises questions about populism's potential beyond nation state. I don't have time to go into details of that DM25 movement as a representative of transnational populism. Just I will mention some main dimensions of that movement. So DM's criticism of the elite are mainly aimed at the European and even global elite consisting of supranational institutions, transnational corporations, and a range of national governments that deny their citizens sovereignty and collaborate with state institutions and corporations. And DM25 offer European citizens will vote for the European Constitution to represent them. So with many restrictions, with many dimensions open to discussion, at least in case of DM's transnational populism, there is a concrete offer. Citizens are European citizens without referring to their national identity, and those European citizens will participate in Europe-wide elections to vote for European Constitution who represent them at Europe, rather than authorizing some bureaucrats or organizations to represent them without being elected. In this movement, there is an election for European Constitution, and those elected people will represent this European citizen. So, but in case of China, so we have to define who are the citizens. Of course, when we look at the issue from the Belt and Road Initiative perspective, now we are dealing with a global scale. Therefore, rather than a national citizen, a citizen, notion of citizen at national scale, we are looking at global citizens. Also, who are the global scapegoats? Let me say, who are the global elites? Who are to blame within the concept of Chinese approach? And what are the mechanisms to represent those global citizens to improve their well-being, their representation quality? In China, so let me start with more directly with Chinese perspective. So let's start with the definition of global elite or global establishment from a Chinese point of view. Yes, China utilizing a critical language against Western civilization most of the time. It blames Western imperialism. It blames global capitalists, mainly American and European capitalists. And also it blames multinational companies as global elite and global scapegoats. Not only those elements of global economy, but also China brings selective criticism of the so-called Western multilateral organizations and calls for reforming those institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, of course, United Nations. But these are criticized by China in terms of improving the capacity of Chinese representation in those institutions, rather than making them really global organizations rather than making them really global institutions. That is why I am using the term China using a selective criticism of global institutions. So, however, there is a principal agent problem here. So, I am using the term principal agent here in the sense that, on the one hand, China is a part of this global economy. China is part of those global institutions, organizations. On the one hand, China is being represented in those institutions, and China is getting benefit from the established global economy. But on the other hand, China criticizes that global economy and its institutions, which has brought Chinese current economic success. So there is, who is China is blaming? Itself or somebody else? It is not clear. Chinese blaming of global scapegoats, global elites is not clear, and it is a contradictory. That is why there is a principal agent problem there. A second issue is to invent, of course, global people. Who are the global people, citizens that China is talking in favor of them to represent their interest, etc. So here again, we have to create a transnational people. But populist rhetoric requires a mechanism of representation. What is the mechanism that is going to represent global people? What is that mechanism? Indeed, China is an authoritarian state advocating authoritarian development trajectory. China refrains from acknowledging any national regimes globally. It does not prioritize democracy, human rights domestically, and in its international engagements. China lacks an agenda to champion the interest, representation, and voice of the masses against elites in any countries. Its diplomacy operates on a state-to-state basis rather than being pro-people, pro-centric at anywhere. Therefore, when you establish your global diplomacy along the Belt and Road Initiative from state to state, excluding any grassroots movements, excluding any social movements from the scene, you cannot advocate citizens there. China is directly says that Chinese approach to nation states are independent of their regime. Whatever they are doing inside, it doesn't make any sense for a Chinese approach. In that regard, my understanding of Chinese populism is that China is using pragmatism and opportunism rather than any established terminology of populism. In conventional sense, we cannot argue that Chinese approach to the world can be explained in the context of a transnational populism or a global populism, if we want to stick to the rising literature of populism, indeed. So just let me stop at this level saying that first, Chinese criticism of global elites, Chinese criticism of global scapegoats are not clear, as China is part of that establishment and benefiting from that one. Second, Chinese invention of global citizen is completely irrelevant because Chinese approach is directly from state to state, independent of their political system. And but still, China assert that China has such a worldview, respecting sovereignty and equality, respect for international affairs and the type of regime. But China offers a collaborative globalization along the Belt and Road Initiative, composed of 3 items: community of shared destiny with a harmonious society, mutual consultation, joint construction, and share benefits, a win-win game through one belt, many receipts. even if these are very, very romantic way of explaining Chinese perspective in Belt and Road Initiative, in reality, Chinese Belt and Road Initiative offers us something quite unusual. First of all, it is non-institutional in governance. Who is governing what? Indeed, unlike the Western rule and contract-based governance, Chinese approach evolves through memorandum of understanding with quite unclear terms and conditions, especially in weak authoritarian states. It is quite flexible, it is open-ended, and it calls for continuous renegotiation. From Chinese perspective, these are positive dimensions of Belt and Road Initiative, but I will argue that these are not positive dimensions explained in the Belt and Road Initiative, because there are many projects, mainly in extraction, construction, transportation. There are many other sectors, but the big part of Belt and Road Initiative projects are in those three sectors. Those projects have a very big size. They are very much complex. In those projects, different authoritarian, non-democratic governments are involved. There are a number of contractual links, and the concealment of work and entrenched national interest offer opportunist approaches for skimming, corruption, fraud, and money laundering, indeed. Especially in a limited local capacity and other asymmetries, Chinese offers do not come into reality, because non-transparent and authoritarian governments concession sovereign state guarantees to Chinese projects, and weak administrations result in, unfortunately, something which is not good for global citizens.
Dr. Öztürk,
yes,
I would
please.
like to ask you to move towards your conclusions, please.
Okay. So Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, with its non-institutional governance structure, with its terms and conditions between asymmetric states, results in debt trap diplomacy, transfer of strategic national assets to China, and Beijing-controlled institutions, sometimes military expansions in many countries. Chinese, in order to create influence in those countries along the Belt and Road Initiative countries, China uses also sharp power politics. Chinese use of politics is not soft power, in the sense that those policies are orchestrated by an authoritarian regime. They are exercised in a manipulative, coercive, and often covert way, and geared toward infiltration and disinformation to manipulate society through Chinese diplomatic missions, through the United Front, organized in many countries as a long-arm Chinese Communist Party, and Chinese student associations and scholarship associations in many countries to silent university, democratic society, media in many countries. So my conclusion is that in order to counterbalance Chinese sharp power politics and improve the outcomes in Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese use of populist rhetoric, which is not correct indeed, should be rejected. In order to reject all those things and improve the outcomes, democratic countries need to work together to raise awareness within their entire societies, avoid economic over-reliance on China, formulate plans to fight disinformation and malign manipulation in media, and reaffirm democratic values and enhance their soft power efforts at home and abroad, similar to any democratic countries. That is the end of my presentation. Sorry for keeping it a little bit longer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Öztürk, for a very interesting presentation, also for pointing to the connection between populism and election or different types of people representation, and the distinction between transnational globalism or global populism and nationalist populism as a global phenomenon. So I think there's plenty of topics to take up in the discussion round. But first we have our fourth and last presentation of today. It will be presented by Dr. Yongyong Chang, Assistant Professor in Asian Pacific Regional Studies at the National Donghua University, Hualien, Taiwan. Dr. Yongyong Chang's presentation is entitled "The Expanding Reach of China's Authoritarian Influence, Shaping a New Illiberal Digital Order." Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderators, and also thank you. Let me try to share my screen right now. So just want to make sure if everybody can see the screen in full size. Okay, great. So first of all, thank you very much for the organizer, ECPS, and also for the moderator. My name is Yongyong Zhang, coming from Taiwan, now lecturing in National Donghua University. So I'm very happy and pleasures to be here to attend this panel. So today I'm going to talk about probably not in that very direct directions for the populism, but I'm trying to asking when technology meets authoritarianism and trying to explore, trying to share with you the expanding reach of China's authoritarian influence. Is it really shaping a new liberal or illiberal digital order? So just to give you the outlines of my talk today or presentations, first I'm trying to give it in a broader sense to looking at the world order or the current debate on the world order before talking about this emergent digital order, and then move to on China as a main influential factors or actor. Then I'm trying to looking at one small case of Huawei's safe cities. Then I will finish with my reflections and also conclusion, hopefully in time. So basically, on the very beginning, I think to looking at a very broader sense of the world order, it's the world order refers to the existing liberal world order is under crisis, and I'm trying to summarize or to make it a bit simple. Apologize for this. That there might be two group of scholars discussions in the literature. That the current world order is under crisis, but for the first group of people, this crisis actually temporary. So they're expecting that it still continue with this established liberal order, and in order to facilitate this kind of liberal order, the rule of the United States plays a very important imperative role. The second group of people holds quite different opinion that, well, the world order is actually not temporary under crisis, already undergone a long-term shift or the social system crisis. So it's irretrievable. It's not going back to this main dominant liberal world orders. Instead, it's going to be some kind of a new multiplex world, as Achaya trying to propose. And in that kind of context, the rule of emerging powers, China and India, play a very important influential role. So of course, the main concern is how about the future of the world order, and how about the rule of China? So China playing a very decisive role in a sense, not just having the capability, economically, even military, but also China has this willingness in a sense to reshape or to involve this world order in a sense that right now is not satisfied with the world order. It's unfair, unreasonable. So I think we should also myself asking how China can be a game changer of the world order, and to narrow it down for today's talk or presentation, looking at the digital sphere or digital order, which I think is a bit different, although it should be also embedded within the broader sense of the world order, but it's a bit different in a sense that the digital order is relatively fragmented and still under construction. So I think this is therefore very crucial to take a look on how China can play a role in shaping this emerging digital order. So when it comes to, of course, the contagious emerging digital order, the main concern or the main topic or the consideration is, for instance, all those technology advancement, development in applying to the digital world or sphere. Are they going to be utilized in a way that advance the free and open societies, or it should, or it somehow might contribute to the strengthening autocratic or authoritarian regimes. So there are mainly two discourses going on when it comes to what kind of digital order should be defined. So on the left-hand side, you could see this is based on a lot of the liberal order. The liberal digital order champions this democratic values of freedom, transparency, individual autonomy in this digital sphere, stress a lot about the free flow of the information, and also those technology development will ultimately lead to the greater freedom and also lead to the democracy. So digital democracy as a term, but on the other kind of style of governance in the digital sphere, which is being termed as a digital autocracy or digital authoritarianism, is trying to define that it's the use of the high-tech innovations by authoritarian government or regime in a sense to manipulate information and to control population in a sense for the sake of advancing political objective, for instance, region stability or survival. And in this particular context, of course, security and stability, national stability and national security outweighs the internet freedom. And following this logic, it is not the citizen or individual who are empowered by the technology advancement or in this digital world, but it is state who can access and who can ensure or utilizing the technology to fulfill its purpose. And what makes this digital order somehow also contagious in a sense is because if based on this liberal sense or liberal defined digital order, it is still not clear when it comes to definition in the sense that technology advancement or technology development always outpace the existing legal and regulation system. But at the same time, China is also increasing its influence together with the Chinese tech firms in shaping various digital ecosystem. So looking at China's expanding influence, first of all, domestically, you could see already within China, there are various ambitions, various visions or initiative trying to stress a lot about becoming a cyber superpower. So in 2014, Cyberspace Administrations of China also trying to was established and trying to, of course, the responsibility for this cyberspace administration is to implement and also formulate the cyberspace policy in a sense also to regulate, to control, to censor the internet space. And it's also not surprising that in 2015, under the banner of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Digital Silk Road was proposed and emphasized as one of the flagship of the BRI. The key thrust, of course, to building digital infrastructure along this route together with the BRI participating countries, but also to internationalize Chinese technology firms' competitiveness in the global market. The most importantly, I think it's also China's efforts to go from the standard takers to the standards makers or even the norms maker. As I showed it here, 2018, China's Standards 2035 was proposed in a sense to empower enterprises or tech firms to work together with China's nation states in this process of international standardizations. 2019, standardizations administrations of China also making it very clear for the policy objective is to establish a platform along this DSR route to work together with the BRI participant countries to establish a platform to integrate and also to establish this international standardized mainly led by China. So that shows somehow some kind of Chinese approach in the digital governance. That is digital technology, as I mentioned, that is not definitely only for a driver of economic development, but it could be also a tool for preserving stability, even extending political control. But in order to realize all these efforts, endeavors, and also objectives, there is one very important points to mention is the critical role played by Chinese tech firms. So Chinese tech firms, I think you can all names in your head that Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi, and also Huawei, for instance. And for Chinese government, it's also very clear to cooperate Chinese technology firms together to work and shape and form this digital order or digital governance. So Central Cyberspace Affairs Commissions also make it very clear and straightforward that they were striving for increasing tech giants' global market share, and also to realize to spread the Chinese standards around the world, as well as increase the influence on discourse and legal norms. So that somehow shows this very complex public and private relations that Chinese and tech firms or company are or has been co-opted by the central government, that the lines between companies' quest for commercial advantage and states' pursuit of strategic objects has been blurred. And to list some of the interesting point is, first of all, it is somehow required that a party branch or committee should be established in Chinese tech companies. So without particular regulations or the process of transparency, it also means that government might also involving in the process of decision making and also directions of the company. And linkage to the CCP and also POA, for instance, some of the founder with its background that is had a close tie with the CCP, and also some companies, tech companies, receive financial support from the central government and engage in a defense-related research or development. So it's no longer simply for technology innovations or business profit. It can also be used for military modernization. And one of the other relatively debatable or aroused a lot of attention is in 2017, this national intelligence law that somehow codified the obligations of those entities based in China to work together with Chinese government in terms of sharing or working together to gather the intelligence information. So if we're looking at moving to this empirical examinations of the Huawei Safe City project, the reason to talk about this, of course, is increasing expansion since its introduction in 2014. It has been growing until 2019. It was approximately around 73 cities already agreeing or signing the MOU together with the Huawei that is spreading around the world. But according to the CSIS report, that if you're looking at all those 73 countries or cities, they somehow participating in those safe city project. There are some three very interesting characteristics that there are, most of them, a high percentage of them, they are non-liberal politically, and they are located in Asia or African continent, and also feature economically with lower middle income level. So that somehow shows some kind of authoritarian influence or leverage from China might be strengthened in those kind of a context. So what is the Safe City project, which is mainly led by Huawei? It is called by Huawei on the website, it's a Safe City Solutions, the solution that can help governments to reduce crime rates, prevent and respond to crisis more effectively, to ensure there will be safer environment for all. So from this image, it's just trying to give you an idea how Huawei trying to promote the idea of the Safe City project. So this Safe City product, which is mainly the technology product by Huawei, is the so-called the Intelligence Operations Center. And Huawei described it as some kind of city, the brain of the city. And this brain of the city will somehow make sense of the input, which is being made by the nervous system of the city, network cameras and other sensing devices, to decode or to interpret the information and understanding information to the police station and also to the municipal cities, in a sense, to ensure stability and also safety in that city. So if we narrow it down to looking at this, of course, the rationale is relatively simple. There is a demand to solve the urgent public problems, and China or Chinese tech firms, they are able to provide the solutions. But the problem, of course, I'm trying to ask why China particularly. There are also other countries, there are also other enterprises can provide. I think one of the very important point is this idea of enhancing state capacity and also legibility that China trying to promote discursively around the world. So state capacity, the ability of state leaders to use the agencies of the state to get people in the society to do what they want them to do. And this kind of state capacity depends a lot on legibility. And legibility refers to the breadth and depth of the state's knowledge about its citizens and their activities, in a sense, to realize effective and centralized governance. So I think those are the core concepts discursively promoted by Chinese tech firms together with China's government, that increasing some kind of incentive for the recipient countries to adopt the Chinese approach when it comes to digital governance. So if we narrow it down to looking at the case in Kenya, so capital city, Nairobi, was one of the first cities that in Africa to deploy this Huawei Safe City, and it also became part of the main project of the Digital Silk Road. Similarly, under this framework, demand and supply, that Nairobi is actually having this bad reputations of a steady rise in criminal activities that is even being called as Nairobi. So in order to tackle those problems, well, Huawei provided solutions, or surveillance, integrated urban surveillance systems, include the installations of thousands of security cameras by Huawei. It is a cooperated project. It's not just about Huawei, involving also government of Kenya and also the leading company, Safaricom in Kenya, and with financial support granted by the Chinese government. The current situations, around 2,000 Huawei surveillance cameras citywide, all sending data, documenting data, interpreting data to the police station. How about the result? According to Nairobi's reported crime rates and also the investigations and questionnaire made by the Agile Lens Institute in 2023, there is no significant improvement in terms of reducing crimes. So started to wonder, is it really providing the Safe City project solutions or actually repercussions? So while implementing those Safe
Dr.
City...
Tang, I would like to ask you to slowly wrap up the presentation.
Thank you. Sure. So first of all, the issues of the transparency. There is no sufficient data protection laws in Kenya when the project was implemented. The law was released in 2019, but still not fully implemented. And there's no check and balance when this kind of surveillance network is operated. So how about those data protections and privacy issues? Not to mention all the secrecy surrounding the surveillance system might complicate the trust between citizens and the state in Kenya, which also have a long-term effect on, let's say, state building in Kenya. So the last slide from my side, I think I would like to mention this Safe City, this kind of project or this kind of technology products provided by China tech firms. It's easy to understand from the rationale of demand and supply. It is nothing that Chinese government or enterprises trying to impose the recipient country to accept. There's a demand and there's a supply. So you can see I listed here the level of the democracy of freedom and the adoption of the Safe City project is not correlated. So for instance, two of the German cities also involving in those agreement, even though they withdraw, Duisburg and also Gelsenkirchen. And the second point, connections between adapting those technology products, will they reinforce authoritarian governance in that recipient countries? To be honest and to admit it, there is no direct connections and there is no proof to show there is a correlations around this particular point. But even though there is no direct proof, I think those Chinese tech firms with those projects, it can be somehow useful in the future for the political leader domestically in that recipient countries, or even for the Chinese politicians to go beyond simply protecting order or maintaining stability. So I think the future prospect for considering shaping this emerging digital order is to pave more or to delve more into this investigation that the scale and directions of Chinese take authoritarian impact in different political environment, not necessarily only in authoritarian context, but it could be also in democratic one. The second point is, it seems to be that there is going to be a divided global technology ecosystem, and those two divided ones couldn't be operatable together, and also political divided, ideology divided. It somehow brings an instability when it comes to digital order and makes the rest of the countries a difficult situations or even a difficult choices to make. So I think I will simply stop here and thank you for your attention. And I'm very looking forward to the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation that this time highlights the role of surveillance and the transparency of both state and private companies in running our data, surveilling us. It's something that affects all of us because we carry around and right now are using some of the main means of surveillance that are available to states and companies across the world, including our smartphones and the computers that we are actually watching this on in this very moment. So thank you very much for drawing that attention and making those connections. And we have now come to the Q&A session. You can raise your hand and ask a question directly. I will give you the word. You can raise it either digitally, as two people have already done, or you can raise it also in person directly on the screen if you're on. You can also write your questions into the chat. I think everybody should have access to the public chat. And then I will read them out loud or give you the word if you so choose. So yes, please. I unfortunately don't see your name, but the ECPS scholar, go ahead and ask your first question.
Sorry, I forgot to rename. My name is Selçuk from ECPS. I want to thank you for all these fascinating presentations. They were all excellent and enlightening. I want to ask Professor Lavichka. That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. How much has the Chinese administration been successful in controlling religion, in particular Islam and religion in general? And you also said that the Chinese administration is trying to control if they cannot destroy. So how has it been, or how can you rate them in terms of their success in wiping out religion from the public life? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think it's quite difficult to say. I mean, you would have to be in a field, which is quite impossible, at least in certain regions. But obviously, wiping out the religions, it's not really working out in a way that, at least according even to Chinese numbers, the number of religious believers in China is rising. So it's not working this way. Let's ban it, let's destroy it. So that's why I mentioned that the strategy is probably the better strategy for the Chinese government is to control it, and control it by different administration measures that they're issuing. Also the specific regulations I mentioned, for example, for the Xinjiang region. So yeah, it's difficult to say. I mean, they're certainly trying to make to control everything. So if you read the measures, they're not just about who can teach, what you can say, but it's also about accounting. It's about different fines, whether you can accept donations. If you accept donations, it has to be approved. So it's basically like control of all aspects of the religious life. In terms of, you asked about the Muslims, of course, there is the special regulation about the Hajj pilgrimage, which is strictly controlled, and it's basically group organized. So yeah, they're not successful in terms of, I guess, eliminating religion from people's minds, but I think they're more and more successful in managing religion as it was a, I don't know, party state run organization. But yeah, I think Rune might also know quite a lot about it because he has more experience from the field than I do. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thanks a lot, Kunha. did you have a question as well you wanted to ask?
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation, Professor Chan, right? So I think in your last slide, you argue that there is no direct proof, but Chinese tech firm and high-tech products like Huawei Safe City could be useful for political leaders in ways to go beyond like simply protecting orders or maintaining social stability. So my question, does high-tech companies from, for example, Google, Twitter, or Facebook or Meta has the same effect, right? Can be used to, for example, go beyond maintaining social order, or they maybe be used in these grassroots social movements, or where they benefit the United States governments? That's my question.
Thank you, Punter. I think your question is very interesting. I think a lot of people also talking and also putting this kind of doubts. Is it actually the same thing going on? Are we using the Xiaomi cell phone, or is it the same? Are we using the iPhone? I think this is one point I would like to mention. It's about this sovereignty issues, which is called digital sovereignty. In the sense that digital sovereignty previously, when it comes to digital space, there is this two different main approaches. One is focused a lot about this multi-stakeholders approach, means that transparency, which is based a lot about this liberal values. And the other stress a lot about the rule of state-centric, multi-layer approach. In that approach, of course, involving various participants or actors also, but it stressed a lot about state's role. And particularly in this post-Snowden era, that this idea of digital sovereignty has been raised or has been increased, that a lot of now a lot of countries also strengthening the idea of the digital sovereignty. That means that, of course, your questions when it comes to how can we make sure those digital technologies might not be used in the different contexts, different democratic contexts. The thing I think probably is about, as I mentioned, whether there is any kind of check and balance system going on, and also is there also some kind of data protections law being implemented? If those kind of mechanism coexisting, or there is this balance mechanism going on, at least it is possible to minimize that possibility. But as I mentioned, those before the Snowdens, people talk about multi-stakeholder approach. It means that cyberspace shouldn't be regulated, particularly by nations, or nation states shouldn't having this increasing rule involving this particular virtual space. But after post-Snowden area, then the idea seems to be central states should also play particular role when it comes to, is there any damage of the sovereign, or is there any sacrificing of the sovereign? So I would say what important is whether there is any particular mechanism in terms of check and balance, and also is there any particular data protections laws or those kind of ways or tools in way to balance and to check whether the data or whether the private informations might be further forwarded to another different geopolitical or geostatic use. So that is my very simple answer, but I hope somehow it can satisfy.
Yeah, actually, thank you for your response. Well, as you mentioned, there's no like data protection laws in these Africa countries, but at the same time, like for example, this Facebook, Twitter, or Meta and Google, they are also operating in these countries. So I mean, the overall the situation is the same, right? So it's not only about like Huawei; it's also about the operating of these like high-tech companies from Western countries. I think what Huawei did, or what China did, is like providing maybe a different future to the I mean a different path to the future, which is different from high tech or products provided by like United States. So I mean that's to some extent it's good, but also at the same time how to regard this, where it be only a challenge or also has some benefit, right? Because right now there are always like reported scandal or has proved like scandal about this surveillance from these high-tech companies, right? But only because China like provided these high-tech companies, I mean, that's at least not fair, even though there is at least there is China provided alternative ways, might be alternative choice for other, like for example, Africa countries. That's my opinion. Wow.
No, I understand that. Just a very brief response on just one sentence. Probably, I think it's also makes sense. That is why when it comes to the United States and China competitions, or even the great power rivalry, people talking about it's not just about the trade war. It's actually more about the technology in this field. And why it is particularly important is because technology, in a sense, has this increasing return. So ones who had occupy this very ahead or the first positions, it make it very difficult for the second or for the rest of to catch it up. And I think when Chinese having different kind of initiatives like a Made in China 2025 and also those standard, as I mentioned, like 2035, Chinese government very actively involving giving subsidies and also cooperating, as I mentioned, co-opted with the enterprises. And I think that makes also how to make this competition fair and how that is also one of the starting point. And then the very major concerns, how to compete fairly in a sense, also in those countries that they are still lacking and they are looking for whereas they're vulnerable in a sense when China's promoting those discursive in terms of state capacity and also legibility. So that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this engaging discussion. I think it's a very important question to ask, and it's part of this panel also to ask, how does China fit into the global order, both from the perspective of authoritarianism, rising authoritarianism, also from the perspective of populism, and of course related to that very much the perspective of surveillance and the abuse of digital technologies that we have seen rampantly over the last decade or two. And of course, yeah, you mentioned Snowden. There are many other examples that we have seen this. I just posted a link in the notes that I would like to recommend because it shows a cooperation of surveillance technology between China and one of the close Western allies, which is the state of Israel. This is not about Huawei, it's about Hikvision, but it's Darren Byler's article in the Made in China journal on this cooperation, which on both sides, as we have seen, have been participant in massive human rights violations and atrocities in Xinjiang on the one side and in Palestine on the other, of course. So we have another question by Bulent. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question yourself. If not, I will read it out loud.
Please go on. Thank you.
Okay. So Bulent writes, thank you for the insightful presentations and engaging discussions. My question is for Dr. Kunche. How does the concept of the people in contemporary China differ from its historical usage in the country? How has the exclusionary articulation of the people evolved under the current political context? And how does it resonate with or diverge from other populist authoritarian movements worldwide? Thank you. And so the question is about the historical development and depth, and also about comparative global perspective.
Well, thank you for your question. That's a really good question. I think the concept of the people, as I mentioned, always revolving around three meanings: the nation, the sovereign people, and also the normal people. So in the context of China, like there's a really long time of history, like the people only refers to the agrarian or the farmers, those from the grassroots. They excluded the elite. I think particularly during the before the opening up or before the Cultural Revolution, the elite, cultural elite are excluded in this concept of the people. And right now that I think like from 2011 to to 2016. And during this period, the people or the netizens discussed online mainly refers to socially vulnerable groups. So there is a lot of articulation of socially vulnerable groups. They portray themselves as socially vulnerable groups to against the political elite or the established power. But after that, right now, like from 2016 to currently, the people discussed online mostly we can see the rise of nationalism. So in this sense, the people refers to, or people appears in the name of the Chinese nation. I think this is also resonant with the global context, with rise of nationalism after after 2016, and also because of the trade war between the China and also the United States. So in this sense, that there is a rising voice in the name of the Chinese nation against the foreign others. So I think that's the general development of this the concept of the people in history, and how it diverged from the other populist authoritarian movements worldwide. I think in general, actually, we can see there is a rise of nationalism since the 2016, and mostly, for example, the rise of the populist party in the Netherlands, the Party for Freedom. So they appears in the name of the Dutch people. In this sense, it also refers to the national people. So I mean, in general, that this rise of nationalism resonant greatly with populist national people. Well, I hope this addressed your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. At this moment, I don't see any other questions. Anybody else who wants to unmute themselves and ask a question or comment?
Yeah, I do have a question for Martin. And your research mainly focused on religion, and you addressed the religion's policy development over the years, which is nice. I'm wondering, have you ever think about how to relate like religion study with populism studies, because like this religion or religion populism is also widely discussed in the Western context. For example, the rise of the Party of Freedom in the Dutch in the Netherlands. So it against like Muslim or the Islam, right? So I'm thinking about, have you ever think about, like, for example, how to do this kind of research in the context of China?
Thank you. Well, there are so many things. I wish I could do. But I'm not, to be absolutely clear, I'm not expert in religions. What I'm interested in is basically the regulations concerning religions, how the law evolves, how the law is amended, what are the kind of official narratives. So indeed, I think it would be absolutely fitting to the study of populism as well. But at the moment, it's more of a kind of side interest of mine, as I'm supposed to work on something slightly different for my project. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and yeah, it's certainly a future possibility.
Thank you. I would like to follow up with a question also for Martin, actually, because I was wondering what this restriction of religions, particularly of Islam, or in controlling it and sort of bringing it in under a state umbrella, how that has been reacted to in Muslim majority states with which China is working closely together and trying to exert a lot of influence, and maybe also in South America, where there's a very strong Catholic focus, if there has been any kind of reaction or backlash, or how China manages that balance.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's quite it's pretty interesting topic actually, and I think one of the few Muslim countries kind of voicing discontent about the situation of the Muslims in China is Turkey. But the other countries, if you look at the various UN documents, there were UN documents criticizing China for breaching the basic human rights or for the situation in Xinjiang. And a few weeks later, China would come up with similar documents with signatures of more countries, a lot of them being from the Middle East, actually praising China how greatly it's fighting terrorism and extremism. Yeah, that's for many people quite surprising that the Muslim community is not really supporting the Muslims in China. Actually, you see that the Palestinian representatives would be meeting with the Chinese, and they would be again clapping each other backs like, yeah, we are doing great, and China is doing great fighting against terrorism. I'm not familiar with the South America, but of course, in terms of Christianity, in terms especially Catholicism, last few years there have been these secret deals between Vatican and Beijing. No one knows the content, but it seemed to be kind of mutual agreement that Vatican will recognize the Catholic priests in China before they were basically excommunicated because they were not approved by Vatican. I think now it's not the case. For Vatican, of course, China, as I said, the number of religious believers is rising. So for Vatican, it's a kind of important injection of new believers. While in, I guess, Europe, Northern America, the number of believers is going down. So yeah, it's kind of really tricky and sometimes surprising when you realize who is supporting who and who is actually not supporting who. So that's the case of the Muslims. That might be the case of the Catholic Church in China. Although still, I mean, Vatican is the only European country, if you can call it country, that recognizes Taiwan and has its embassy in Taiwan, and Taiwan has its embassy in Vatican. But still, Vatican knows that there are millions or tens of millions of Christians in China, and that it has a potential. So they're also making some secret dealings with PRC. So yeah.
That's very interesting indeed, and it again comes back to questions of power politics versus principles, including human rights principles. We're witnessing that on a massive global scale at the moment, also, but also in these religious institutions. Hadja had a question, so I will pass to her first. Go ahead, Hadja.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't find the raising hand button. It's silly, but yeah. Thank you very much for all fascinating presentations. I really enjoyed it a lot. And my question goes to Dr. Chung, sorry. It's fascinating. I really enjoyed it a lot. So just briefly, I just want to say that it seems that smart city is not just a battleground for economic and technological competition between the companies, right? So, but it's also kind of battleground for competition between political and social systems, as long as I understand correctly, and the geostrategic competition. So do you think more likely in the future there's a new developments emerge of different kind of a different type of smart cities within different definition of what the smart cities as a model? Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I think, of course, how do you define, of course, from this Safe City project, stress a lot about the safe, but it's actually, as you mentioned, it's part of the so to speak, the broader smart city projects, basically using all this in terms of Wi-Fi, in terms of surveillance, camera, facial recognition, all those techniques, and as well as, for instance, how to improve the e-governance within different kind of use of the technology advancement. I think what is missing, or of course, how to improve in these directions. And it's not just China or Huawei or those Chinese tech firms trying to define or trying to somehow modeling what smart cities should be. I think it should be, if this digital world is borderless as it should be, then it should somehow being contributed by a lot of different kind of stakeholders. And I think one of the important things from my perspective, only my personal humble opinions, it could be more somehow putting more kind of humanity into this digital world, in a sense, to define the smart cities. And I think particularly when we talk about the smart cities, and it is a lot about this very hot idea of applying technologies or different kind of techniques, but it rarely talk about how to kind of enter changes with cultural, or how to bring, for instance, various cities together on the platform to talk about the possibility and to work somehow multilaterally. And I hope, and I think, of course, I couldn't definitely say that that's the direction, but I hope that can be in this direction to further develop this, so to speak, smart city, and not necessarily focusing a lot about how the new innovations or creations provided by various companies, each competing with the new products and new source or new sphere of innovation. So that is simply my idea, but I think that's a very interesting question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We're coming towards the end, unfortunately, of today. I did see, though, that Bulent had a comment, and also Kunhe, because Kunhe has taken most of the questions so far. I'm going to give Bulent the word first, and then Kunhe afterwards. Both of you have 1 minute. I'm going to cut you short at that to give you a comment. Please go ahead. Bulent, you're first. You're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Gune. Actually, this is a kind of follow-up question to your question to Dr. Lavishka. I wonder what ways do this Chinification and cynicization of religion policies reflect broader trends of populist authoritarianism within China? And what implication do these trends hold for both domestic and domestic religious communities, including Buddhist and Falun Gong, beside of Muslim, as you mentioned, Christians and other maybe philosophic religions, and also how it affects China's global image? Thank you.
Kunhe, was your comment also to Martin, or is it unrelated to that?
No, it's unrelated, but actually, yep.
And Martin, you get 30 seconds to answer it, and then Kunhe.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, the cynicization or Chinification, it depends how it means quite the similar thing, I think. And it's about, as I mentioned, that the religion is becoming kind of de-religionized because it's infused by many things that are not connected to the religion. So why people studying Buddhism should learn about Xi Jinping thought on this or that or socialist core values. So of course, from the global perspective, it doesn't look good. That's why China's being criticized, that it doesn't actually follow its own constitution that provides freedom of religion for its people and so on. So indeed, I mean, it's a bad image, but China is nowadays strong enough. It's not the, just accepting what the other states think. It's, it's a strong country, powerful country that thinks that they can also change things as, what's human rights with Chinese characteristics, rule of law with Chinese characteristics, basically changing the kind of global understanding of these terms, so including religion.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I also want to just mention that in relation to the Sinicization of especially Islam, Haja Gonul, who asked her question before, is an expert and just submitted and defended her PhD thesis on that very topic. So you can reach out to her also if you're particularly interested in this. Now, Kunhe, you have a minute, not more, and then we will wrap up.
Yeah, actually, my question goes to Professor Osberg. I think he left just now. I'm not sure. But actually, I think during his presentation, he first mentioned that China is criticizing like a Western civilization, and also talking about the One Belt One Road as a depth-tried. So my question actually is like contradict in his presentation, that how can China on the one hand criticizing like Western civilization, and also on the other hand trying to collaborate with these countries in European countries, trying to like promote our like a One Belt One Road and collaborate with them. So actually, I think there is a contradiction in this. But I did like some research on One Belt One Road, mainly focus on how One Belt One Road discourse was metaphorically constructed. I found it very interesting that in Chinese like a newspaper, we always regard it as a platform to collaborate, to negotiate. So that's why at the Chinese like One Belt One Road was previously used as a strategy and changed to initiative. That's because strategy is a war metaphor. Well, for the government, they don't want to build a ideology of war or competition. So that's why the government changed to initiative to promote collaboration and with different stakeholders. And from Western newspapers, is mainly use the war metaphor, like for example, Chinese like economic war with countries, and ideological war, and also tech war. So you can see that's two different of narratives. They use different metaphors to construct like different ideology. So that's my my comments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you all for contributing. We have come to the end now, and we're going to wrap up. It's been a very fascinating session, a lot of great discussions at the end, also very engaging. I learned a lot from all of you. One of the things that I think I'm definitely taking away from this is the question of populism's relation to the political system and the global reach of populism, either, as Öztürk pointed out, a possibility of a transnational populism of different scale, or indeed the global phenomena of nationalist populism, which I think is what we hear about more often and see much more clearly. Also, one thing that I was a little bit unclear about in some of the presentations, but unfortunately we don't really have time to discuss it now, but it could be something to think about further in the future, is this question of the elites versus the scapegoats. I was a bit puzzled by, for instance, multinational corporations being mentioned as scapegoats. That is definitely not how I understand it. Or elites being mentioned as scapegoats. The scapegoats that I often see being pursued in populism are exactly the vulnerable groups. They are not the initiators of populism. They are basically the victims of populism, including some of the groups that we've talked about, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, but also, for instance, in Turkey, the Alawites or the Kurdish, and in the United States, the Mexican immigrants and the Black population, and so on and so forth. So that's just something that I wanted to add, that I felt was a bit unclear in the theoretical framework, and maybe that's something that can be followed up in a future session, maybe here at the ECPS, where you will continue to have your talks on global authoritarian populism, and also beyond that in our fora, where I'm sure we're going to see each other again and interact in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass back the word to Christo to make his closing remarks. And I thank you all for being here, for contributing, and also for inviting me to moderate the session.
Thank you, Dr. Steinberg, for your great moderation. And thank you to all the panelists for your very insightful presentations today. I'd also want to extend a big warm thank you to all of the attendees today for coming to today's panel. You've definitely enriched it with your questions and your remarks. Could everyone please mark on your calendars that our next panel will be on May 30th. And please remember to register and join us as we discuss the resurgence of expansionist Tsarism, populist autocracy in Russia. Wish you all a great day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.